What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P, Shannon White here for another episode of the Steelers Global Perspective coming at you. My man, Mr. White, Mr. Shannon White, how are you doing today?
We're doing great. We might break a record for heat today. I think the record was 90, which is, I know to use nothing, but we don't get a lot of 90s and 100s here. So we've been out and playing with the dog and letting him get in his doggy pool and even got to bathe him. And we got done eating, and I didn't know if we was going to get to film or not, but or record this, but I was glad when I heard from you.
Yeah, me too. Me too, for 100%. I don't want a weekend to go by where we don't get to chat. So, yeah, no, we're having the opposite. It's very, very cold here. It is... I was just trying to pull it up, but we're having some connectivity issues. But yeah, it's about 11, what we call 11C right now for me, which I think is about 40F off the top of my head. So that's nice and cold for us.
Yeah, you are having your winter
55, now. 55. Yeah, 55. Yeah. There you go, 55. So yeah,
I'm looking forward to getting it. For us.
Yeah, well, it's been a cold winter. It's been more like, it's been 45 a lot this week based on the Fahrenheit math. So yeah, I'm getting pretty over it, and I want the warm weather to come back. So we'll I just have to look forward to being over in the States in September. Anyway, today when we last talked, you and I spoke about maybe talking about the Steelers coaching staff and a change in attitude, and we've seen it in the comments from some of our subs on the channel talking to us about, this coach seems a bit different. They're apparently doing this different. A lot of it's obviously on the offensive side. That's where we've seen the change in bringing in Arthur Smith as coordinator, bringing in the likes of Zani, the wide receiver coach, bringing in the likes of Tom Aff, the coach as well. So pretty exciting from that perspective that the Steelers have got some fresh blood in the mix from a coaching standpoint. But what are you seeing out of these coaches?
Arthur Smith is like all the returning players have to be ecstatic to have an actual NFL qualified offensive coordinator. And so they seem very enthusiastic. A lot of times it's hard to get players to buy in. But I think Arthur Smith's system is such that all the players are looking forward to implementing it. The power running game and opposing your will, and then setting up play action and mismatches on the field, kind of dictating. It seems like they've been reactionary for a while now. Now they're going to be able to hopefully dictate what they want to do to the opposing defense.
Yeah, and I think you've brought up a really good point that I don't think many people have thought about. They've brought in a lot of players on offense and defense, right? Like any team does any year, but it feels like there's been a lot of change like last year. And look, some of them are Arthur Smith guys like Van Jefferson and Miko Pruitt, like Corradell Patterson. So obviously they're going to be keen on the system. But we would know pretty quickly if the other guys that they've brought in for whatever reason were finding it odd, because we knew really quickly with Matt Canada that something wasn't quite there. Like it was a different system and we're building, and there definitely wasn't this energy. So I think I really like what you said there about like the players coming in, and I think what you said there about the players being vocal about it and there being an energy, because I don't think that was really, it was definitely not there with Canada. And people may tell me I'm an absolute idiot and think the opposite. I just don't think it's been there on offense for a little while, to be honest. Like even before Canada, I think pretty much since 2017, I don't really, and obviously Ben being out injured or whatever, I don't think, it's not that the offense is, I'm not saying the offense is bad. What I'm saying is that I feel like, this is the energy level. There's just bigger hype. It seems like people are more bought in. That's just what it feels like as a fan when I see people talking in interviews to me.
And then guys like Russell Wilson, who seems to really be buying in because it's similar in a lot of ways to where he had his most success in Seattle. So
Yeah.
that's a positive development. Justin Fields is buying in again to the new system that they could really focus on a lot of his best skill sets and the way he can roll out, the way he's mobile, the deep ball. There's so much that they can implement off of this regular power running game that's going to suit him if he has to play or gets to play in specialized packages. So I think everybody's on board, and I think George Pickens stands to benefit the most because Arthur Smith's system, the number one wide receiver is the bell cow. He gets the majority of the targets. Yeah. He puts up massive numbers if he's talented, and we know that Pickens is extremely talented. So I'm expecting Pickens to really blossom and benefit in this system.
Yeah, it is really, really exciting in terms of Pickens being given those targets. I also think the thing that I really liked that I talked a little bit about in the live show that I did midweek was around Pickens in the slot. I'm really happy to hear Pickens talk about that for two reasons. One, I think the way Pickens has said, I've got to be moved around to get more open. I've got to expand that route tree. But he also said it simply, like if I get past the first layer of the defense, it should be pretty much straight line to the end zone. And we've seen him, a couple of his touchdowns early in his career so far have been where he's like, not been the furthest guy wide out, and then he's come in and then juke. I mean, you call it, a juke, but like we'll call it a step here. Like he stepped off that foot, one way or the other, and then a cut, inside or slightly out, but still it's within that sort of if you would have framed the field into, left, center, right, into that center part of the field. So for me, that's really important because I think, like, one, it shows his maturity and I need to be moved around. I can't just do one. I can't be a one-trick pony. I'm being this combat catcher. Two, it shows that the Steelers might actually throw it down the center of the field more. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. And three, and I know you want to pick on that, but the last thing I want to say, which feeds into that throwing in the center, it's what I said in the live show, is that the Steelers have not really done crossing routes and drag routes in the last few years. That's been replaced by having a sweep game. Now, Ben has talked about this on his football and podcast before, that one of the core parts of the offense when he was the quarterback, although I think when he's talking about this, he needs to reflect that's pre-elbow injury. But they had a lot of these drag routes. They had a lot of crossing routes in the middle of the field. Pat Freeman, we've talked about as a slot guy. We've talked about the speed of Wilson, Austin, even Van Jefferson is actually a very good route runner. That's one of his traits. So for me, it's like we're unlocking a whole new room of the house. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a room being renovated. We're opening the key, and look what we've got. But the idea that Pickens could thrive in that environment, that says a lot to me, and it also says a lot to me about not just the crossing and using the middle of the field, and drag routes and stuff like that. But it also says a lot to me that play action will hopefully be back in the mix, because when you do that play action, a lot of the time it is those guys that are going, from left to right or right to left. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, the middle of the field is something that the Steelers have neglected, even going back to Ben's latter years. And people don't understand that as a quarterback, congestion up the middle, the offensive line is so vital to that effectiveness over the middle, because the middle is more congestion. There's more risk for tip passes, for interceptions, turnovers. And if the quarterback is not comfortable in the pocket and doesn't have adequate protection up the middle, it's very difficult for them to feel comfortable working the middle. Working outside the hashes, it's clear there's more room. It's safer throws a lot of times. And a guy like Ben, he liked that.
Yeah.
But that going over the middle, if you remember, some of his interceptions, the majority were over the middle. If the ball sailed a little bit, he had pressure in his face, a tip. I remember the Jacksonville playoff game over the middle. A lot of times it was linebackers. And a lot of it was because of all the congestion and the chaos in the middle of the field. Yeah. And he avoided it. Well, then you had Matt Canada come in, who didn't even run routes across the middle very often. So I'm like you. I'm expected to see that now. They have so many options of different skill sets for these guys that they can send across the middle. And Pickens, I don't know if you've seen him do his four corners work.
Oh, yeah.
When he was at minicamp. That was beautiful. I mean, his balance is better. His footwork is smoother and faster.
Oh, yeah.
And,
and he had good footwork to start with.
Yeah. And working with that route god, that has really cleaned up his routes. And I think it's going to give him a more complete route tree. And he realizes that if he can be moved around, that's going to create mismatches, because some of his longest touchdowns, as you said, has been a pass over the middle, and then he just splits the safeties and he's gone.
Yeah.
And he, he loves the big plays, as we all do. So in this offense, I think the possibilities are endless. And it's going to only help those guys, whether they're wide receiver 2, 3, or 4. Because, you mentioned Van Johnson being a really good route runner, but he's also, I think he ran like a 4.39 or something coming out or something like that.
Yeah.
He has the speed that he could get, turn it into something big too.
Yeah,
and
no, you're definitely
last year, you could not use Deontay Johnson in the middle of the field because he didn't like contact. He was scared to get hit. Well, we know that that's not the case, even though Calvin Austin's small. He's a tough little guy, and he will work at middle. So will Roman Wilson. So will Johnson. So, it's Van Jefferson, ain't
it? Yeah.
I said Johnson, but, there's guys there that will be able to work the middle, and there's a variety all the way from Darnell Washington, who's is a big old boy. And, I think he'll be able to especially be effective working the seams in the middle.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that you kind of hit on there when you brought in Washington and like the seams is like, the thing is, if you've got like Pickens on one of those sides, and then you've got on the other side, like running into that slot or into the center of the field, whether they're running from off the line, or if they're, in more of an out wide position, if you get like a guy like Miko Pruitt or Connor Hayward into the middle of the field too, as long as they don't disrupt the route, but if they can go in and block, right, so Pickens can get the first bloke and they can go up as well and clear out a lane where even if he sees the lane opening up, he might be running into the center of the field slightly. Let's say he's slightly left of the line and he's running into that center part of the field, but then he sees them getting a block. He might run a little bit like, sideways in a way, and then find that lane, I guess, if you like. So to me, I remember seeing a lot of that with Miko Pruitt and Jonnu Smith in the Arthur Smith offense, and occasionally when I'd watch the Titans. So for me, I'm like actually really excited. I said this center part of the field could be really, really important, for the Steelers, because, and realistically, even hearing it talked about, I think is a massive win because we haven't focused there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the interior pressure part is interesting from what you say too. And I'm going to say this, like, and people might argue with me because there's a lot of people hating on Kenny Pickett that didn't hate on Kenny Pickett, 6 months ago. Fair. Kenny Pickett didn't say the thing 6 months ago that he said now. But Kenny Pickett was a very, very good down the center thrower in college. He was. His numbers don't lie there. His completion percentages, the yardage, the touchdowns. Canada didn't do that. One, and that's where I think he was really let down by Canada, and he should not have, if the reports were true that he sort of was the reason Canada was back for year 2. He should, that's a big mistake. And I remember Mark and I did several shows about it. You and I might have even spoke about it at the time. But I said, I feel like Kenny, I think there's a video on the channel that literally says, is Kenny Pickett's faith in Matt Canada going to cost him his job? And look where we are, 12 months later off of that.
Yeah, really.
But if the interior pressure hadn't been there as much, and if he'd had a stable interior offensive line, would that have opened? It's hard to say. I don't think it would have, because I don't think Canada cared about the center of the field. But contextually, all things being equal, actually, and Arthur Smith was keen. Remember, he was keen when he came in. He had, it was said publicly that one of the things the Steelers liked was the plans that Arthur Smith had for Kenny Pickett, and Arthur Smith was keen to work with Kenny. And Arthur Smith had seen him in a preseason game and a regular season game within the past 18 months before those interviews. So he knew what he was getting in Pickett. So I'm not saying that it would have been, Arthur Smith and a good offensive line would have been the answer for Kenny Pickett, but and we don't need to die wondering because he's gone now and we've got better quarterbacks on the roster, but it highlights the importance of the center of the field. And if you can't unlock that center of the field, it's got to be a why, and that why has to be addressed. And I just think that's huge for this offense, because instead of having these dink and dunk passes behind the line of scrimmage or having some random deep ball that's covered by three blokes, like remember the interception Kenny had in that game against the Jets where he threw it super deep down to Claypool. It was a little bit Claypool's fault in that one as well. But like they're going to stretch the opposition defense, and I just don't think they've done that in a long time. And when you can create that stress and unpredictability, that's how you have a consistent offense, because you can constantly make that defense have to react to you instead of defense going, oh, we know what the Steelers are going to run. 1-2, run up the middle, sweep play, pot shot over the top, easy. Like it's literally almost like a Madden formula. You can script the defense. You can go, I'm going to run on my base, run a heavy nickel set, or even a heavy dime set, and then on third down, I'm going to run a dime or a different type of nickel play. But it gets very formulaic for the defense, and when defenses don't have to think as much, they tend to get on a roll.
Well, we had talked. Arthur Smith, and I'm really referring to the Tennessee Titans years. I didn't watch a lot of the Atlanta Falcons.
No.
But he didn't have the quarterback, which now I think he will have. But you have to be able to dictate. You have to be able to manipulate. And if you think about the Titans, teams were so focused that on the number one wide receiver, say A.J. Brown, a lot of coverage rolled to him. And then they were concerned about the play action in the middle of the field. How many big plays, passing plays, happened with a dump off on a one-on-one matchup outside with Derrick Henry and a linebacker, and then he ended up 90 yards later in the end zone.
Yeah.
And these ain't handoffs; these are little passes.
Yeah.
But he had a knack, because we got to stop A, we got to stop B, and C would get them. And I think that's why having the variety of weapons that they actually have right now is we're going to see a lot of big plays, and it won't all be Pickens, and it won't all be the running game. These other guys are going to make big plays too, because they're going to dictate and create the mismatches that we're talking about.
And I'm excited for Austin in that. I think Austin will thrive in that role. And I think it's been telling that you've heard a lot from out of different players, in coaching staff about Austin and how he's coming to play.
All good. That's all I've heard is all good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And Azani saying he's very willing to be coached, and his development in 6 to 8 weeks has been terrific. It does make me miss the thought of the Steelers not having Malachi Corley, because I just think he would have been an awesome weapon for them.
I heard something this week.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody was talking about the guy that we really liked the year before, Jonathan Mingo.
Oh, yeah, the guy from the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, the new receiving core that the Panthers have, that he might become expendable.
Oh,
now, we said the year before that he would have been a great fit for last year's offense, but he would also fit with this year's offense.
He'd be a good hybrid between Pickens and a lot of the other wide receivers, and giving yourself a slightly bigger or a thicker guy.
He's a powerful
he's
guy.
like a Jennings. He's a bit like a Jennings at the 49ers.
He can block, and he's got some get up.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, he had a rough rookie year. I picked him up late in fantasy because I thought he might really do something. But he had no quarterback at all. I mean, I think this is the last year of the Bryant Young experiment. I just think the guy, nothing against him, I just think he's too little. Same. And I think that Mingo would really flourish in this offense.
That's a very interesting point, especially because they've brought in Deontay. So does he?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know Deontay, he will, I don't want to say he hogs all the targets, but the way he gets open so quick, you know, a young quarterback like Young's going to want to throw it to him a lot because you want that guy you can count on who's always going to be open.
Well, they put out a video.
He's going to do anything with it after he catches it, but the guy can get open.
Well, they put out a video on it and talked about how they needed a better X receiver. The offensive coach needed. I don't know where I saw this. It might have popped up on YouTube as a short or something. But anyway, basically they were like, we needed an X receiver in this offense. This was the problem with the offense, the new offensive coordinator for them. And then they're like, we really wanted a great X receiver, and that's why we came after you. And it had like Deontay in his hoodie in their sort of coaching, in their facilities. Yeah. But I just put up the Carolina Panthers wide receiver room because I do think he's the odd man out because they've obviously got Deontay, right? They've done a trade there. They want to use him. They got rid of a key cornerback. They've got Leggett. They've got Terrence Marshall Jr., who's ex-LSU, who's a Pickens type at 6'2" and 200 pounds. Yeah. I think Terrence Marshall's a good player. I think he's in a bad offense. They've got David Moore. Then they've got a couple of other younger guys, and they've got Adam Thielen. Jonathan Mingo is super expendable, but yeah, he's 6'2" and 220 pounds according to this. So he's much bigger than people.
Oh, he's a big boy. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was about 210, but 220 is different to 210. Like they're very different.
A very young guy, so it would make sense.
And the numbers available. Numbers available for him too. So I don't think there's a 15. Is there a 15 on the roster right now? I don't think so. Might be wrong. But yeah, he could well be expendable very easily. I
think that's what Khan's doing. I think he's just waiting and seeing. I mean, I don't think they have no desire really to try to bring in one of these guys like a Cook because, again, if you do that, you're basically saying goodbye to Pickens and you're saying goodbye to draft capital and
they're not spending that money
$30 million a year.
Yeah, well, and that's what I talked about in my salary cap video a few weeks back, but particularly I talked about in the live show that I did this week I talked about Trevor Lawrence and how his deal kind of makes you realize that, like, Russell Wilson. I was going to say Roman Wilson. I'm like, don't say Roman Wilson. But Russell Wilson is not real. He's going to need to get paid $35+ million next year. That's what a starting quarterback at a minimum, probably 40. They don't have the money to spend the best part of 30 on IU. That ain't happening. He's not coming, right? The only guy I did talk about McLaurin because I think IU could end up at the Commanders, and McLaurin is much cheaper as an option. But like I was talking about it this week in the live show from the perspective of that the fact that the Steelers like kind of need Justin Fields to work out because it might be the only way they can afford either one of them next year, or other changes are going to have to be made. So from my perspective, I think it is interesting that when I hear these about, the Steelers, I keep hearing a report, from a beat writer, the Steelers are going to bring in, this, a really good wide receiver, before the season starts. I'm like, with what money? With what money? And people will sit there and say they've got 18 million in the cap. Well, they like to have 6 to 8 million to do business, so that gives them 10 million. Like, what wide receiver are you getting for 10 million that you couldn't have got during the second free agency period? Like Michael Gallup, 3 million. DJ Chalk, 3.2 million. Mike Williams, I think, signed for less than 10 million. Like, you could have got any of those guys, and you had the ability to make the cap space then. So I think the Steelers are like, let's wait and see. And it's what you and I have said probably for 6 weeks now. It'll all come down to who's cut with different teams and who becomes available, because that will change other teams' rosters. But so then they may cut someone we like, or it may be that a guy that the Steelers are open to gets cut, or that Azani's worked with at the Chargers, or that, Arthur Smith's worked with somewhere else, but we couldn't bring him in. Or I think Arthur Smith's brought in everyone he's ever worked with at this point. But, there could be someone.
But you look at it, I don't think the Steelers are interested in any of these high-priced guys, but other teams are.
Yeah.
So depending on where they go, there might be a disgruntled employee there who wants out.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
They might be, as we just said, Mingo might be available now because the Panthers signed Deontay or traded for Deontay Johnson. So what I'm saying is, there's always the repercussions, the ripples in the pond when one big name star is traded, other guys become available.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying about McLaurin.
So,
yeah, and that's what my argument was for McLaurin, because the Commanders can save, I think it's like $15 million this year off their cap. Or no, it's post-student, so I think it's $18 million overall, and money in future years by, moving McLaurin on, which they're not going to go sign Ayuk because Ayuk's got this relationship with Jaden Daniels. They're not going to go sign Ayuk and keep McLaurin there. I've got Johan Dotson, they've got Damie Brown, they've got a couple of tight ends, they've got guys. So that was my argument, is that McLaurin's 6 foot and about 210 pounds. So he's again like this Malachi Corley Wingo. He's not as big as Wingo, but he's also an experienced guy that has played in the slot, has played outside.
Well, he's proven. Yeah.
And he's proven, and he's a veteran presence, right? And I don't think Pickens would sit there and go, "Oh, Terry McLaurin's here," at because McLaurin's 29. "Oh, Terry McLaurin's here. I'm not the number one guy." I think that would be a lot more of a
him as wide receiver too. Yeah,
exactly right. So I mean, I've been on the Jimmy McLaurin train for a long time now, so I don't want to.
And they need offensive line help, and the Steelers got Dan Moore Jr. and maybe even somebody else. I mean, they could be a surprise in there.
Yeah, imagine if they didn't hurt.
Like Mason McCormick looks like he's a lot better than they even thought he might be. And, you might not have to give up as much as you think.
I reckon they would take, if they really want Ayuk, I reckon they'd take a third, Herbig and Dan Moore, because Herbig and Dan Moore together would be.
You said Ayuk.
Ayuk, yeah.
Yeah, you think that you still talking about trading for him?
No. If the Commanders want Ayuk,
right, I see what you're saying,
and we want McLaurin, or we're having to get McLaurin. I
agree with that. Yes,
Herbig and Dan Moore, who will have a combined cost of something like $5.5-6 million this year in salary, and then Commanders are still saving $12 million, right? And they've got $46 million cap space, so they can technically afford Ayuk, right? But they want to do that in a manageable way. So
that might be why they keep running Nate Herbig out there as competing as a starting center, trying to convince somebody, hey, this is who you want in this trade.
Well, that's what I was insinuating, I think, on our last, it was either in the comments or our last show. I remember a couple of weeks ago, you and I, but that's that's the only thing that I can think, is that they're trying to say, oh, he's got this versatility, he can play both. But I do worry then, what if Frazier picks up a niggle? Who's going to step in there? So, I want the thing that one of the narratives I want to hear out of training camp is Spencer Anderson's been spending a lot of time snapping the ball with Frazier. That's
there
what
you go. There you go.
That's what I
love it. I love it. Yes.
But I'll tell you this, just not that it matters consequence to anyone. I restarted my Madden franchise last night, and my starting offensive line is Broderick, Siamalu, Frazier, James Daniels, and Fatanu. Because someone's gone and updated they had the original, they did the draft class, but then now they've gone and done the ratings based on where people were picked. And my first play, I had Justin Fields back there. I don't have Russell Wilson because of the cap, but the way the Madden cap works. But first play of the game, first play of the season, 31-yard rush, Najee Harris running through a hole between Isaac Seumalo and Broderick Jones because Frazier didn't miss his block. And I thought, wow, isn't it great that the center doesn't miss their block for once? Not that it matters a consequence. I'm not saying the Steelers are going to do a 31-yard play the first time of the season, but can you imagine? Like, and I think that brings me to the point I kind of wanted to make when I was going to bring up this story is like, I feel like it's only going to take. I mean, Steelers fans are very realistic because how many Steelers fans are cynical, but I can imagine how pumped up this franchise and fan base are going to be when the Steelers make some big plays early, and it's because you see someone just absolutely stop a bloke in their place on that offensive line. And I'm just so keen to see it. I'm Matty Pete with Shannon White. Have a great weekend, depending on when you listen to the segments of this show. But yeah, as always, go Steelers.